My definition of success has saved me many times, and I define it as the willingness to try the next thing, not the outcome, the willingness. So if you define the outcome as successful or not because you got what you wanted or didn't, then I think that's problematic. I think it's much more helpful to say that's information. Now I learn from that. That takes me to the next step and changes my direction. And you have to live with, I have to live. And in this model, you have to live with the uncertainty of the outcome and be okay with that and say it's all part of the process and part of the journey that I cannot anticipate.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to private practice entrepreneur Dr. Bob Navarra in San Carlos, California. Bob is a master certified Gottman therapist, and that is as certified as you can possibly get. Listen as we dive into how he's pivoted his practice toward providing workshops and the mindset that's allowed him to be successful. Welcome, Bob. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Annie. Thank you.
So I want to talk to you about your entrepreneurial journey. I met you years and years and years ago when I was getting certified to be a Gottman certified couples therapist, and you're a master certified Gottman therapist. So you were speaking, and, I was so impressed with your work then. And I want to talk to you about, as we do, the business side of things. So you run workshops for couples.
Correct.
Can you tell us about those? What are the workshops? How often do you do them?
Sure. So I have been around a long time. So I've done a number of different workshops within the Gottman framework. Since I'm this master certified Gottman therapist, basically what that means is I'm certified, but I also teach level 1, level 2, level 3, and provide consultation to people in the certification track. So that's what all of that means. So what that means for me is I've worked all of those workshops, and in addition to them, I've facilitated and continue to facilitate with my colleague Lisa Lund the Art and Science of Love workshop for couples. So we offer that pretty consistently. And then in the last 4 years, I developed 2 workshops in collaboration with John and Julie Gottman and the Gottman Institute. And the first workshop I developed was called Roadmap for the Journey, which is a 2-day workshop for couples in recovery. So it's got this curriculum that I presented now 4 or 5 times, I guess, at this point in treatment programs. And then subsequent to that, developed with the encouragement of the Gottman Institute, a 1-day training for therapists on how to work with couples in recovery and how to actually assess for substance issues and how to work with them and move them through the process of change.
Oh, amazing. I didn't even realize that you offered that. I'm glad to hear about that. How
That's
often
called,
do you...
That's called couples and addiction recovery.
Great. How often are you training therapists in that way?
Well, for the last several years, it's been actually at a national basis. So with the support and collaboration with the Gottman Institute, I've gone all over the place, Chicago and Southern California and Northern California and East Coast, Florida, all over. And that's been the last couple of years. And then this year, I'm going to be offering it. The very next workshop is going to be in Bellingham, Washington, June 1st, in collaboration with another Gottman colleague, Mirabai Wabi. And so it's really kind of taking off, is where we're generating interest with therapists who don't really have a background on how to work with couples in addiction or how to address addiction issues with couples even.
Yeah, and that's so useful. And it's a place where I think so many of us just get stuck.
Right.
Yeah. Excellent. And how did you, with the Art and Science of Love workshop, so that I've participated in that myself with my wife years ago in Seattle. And I mean, it's amazing. I always recommend it to people. And I've recommended your workshop in particular to people. And, and I know it's fantastic. So when did you decide you wanted to step into that instead of just working people through the Gottman method, in couples?
Yeah. So pretty much right away, I've been teaching one way or another at a number of colleges as an adjunct and knew that my heart really is in workshops. And you can reach a lot of people. And I love the teaching aspect. I love the interactional component. And you can do a lot of powerful things in a group structure. And so I knew pretty much right from the get-go.
Okay. What do you notice is possible when it's a group of couples instead of just one couple?
Well, I think it normalizes the difficulties that couples have when they look around in the room and see, wow, there's a lot of other couples here. And it ranges from people that are there for enrichment, but mostly couples that attend this are more on the distressed end of the continuum. And then within the Gottman frame, we can actually explain why couples are struggling and what it takes to move through that. And so when couples just have the visual impact of other couples working on it, I think that's very therapeutic and very helpful, even though there really is no sharing. There isn't any kind of public disclosure stuff that happens, as you know, in these workshops. It's just a powerful setting.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah, and you can see people working. Even if you can't hear what they're saying, you can see, oh, they're working just as hard as we are.
That's exactly right. Yeah, and even though we don't, Lisa and I don't really engage couples in the large structure to talk about occasionally, how was this for you? Mm-hmm. That's a good question. But, pretty much we're speaking to the group, and we can identify common issues from our clinical practice and things we've seen in the group before that tend to have a lot of applicability to couples. Mm-hmm. And that's that normalizing again. And to also say it makes sense that you don't really have the tools, and here's some options you may not know about. And so here they are. And here's this opportunity to make some changes significantly in your relationship.
Yeah. And so how, as a business owner, how do the workshops work for you? Have you found that they're good for you as a business owner as well as clinically?
I've had a lot of overlap with giving the workshops, co-facilitating the workshops, and then have people call me afterwards. Mm-hmm. On the heels of this last workshop Lisa and I did not that long ago, I had 2 referrals from people that happened to be in the area. Mm-hmm. However, that's not really my motivation at this point in my career. Mm-hmm. My motivation is to promote these workshops as a source of healing for couples. And so from an entrepreneurial perspective, it can be rewarding. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get started with this, and you have to be very, very wise with the venue, and hotels can charge a lot. So you have to find a venue that you can work with and has some flexibility. And that's incredibly important to try to make these things accessible from a financial perspective.
That makes sense. And have you found a spot that you use over and over again, or do you find that you have to move around?
No, we have found a spot that works really, really well. Mm. And once you find that spot and you have and Lisa really takes care of this aspect of things. So she's the organizer for for all the logistics stuff. Mm-hmm. And so has worked out arrangements, gets to know the manager, and has a working relationship. So I really don't participate in that aspect of it. It's really the presentation stuff that I bring.
Great.
Yeah.
And how do people find you? I know that, that I had found that you had these workshops just by looking online. Is that how most people find you, or referrals, or what do you find?
I'm thinking it's actually a combination. So between the Gottman website, which has a mighty big outreach, you get listed in there, you've got the Gottman brand behind you, so that absolutely helps. Mm-hmm. And then I know there's strategies about just trying to get to local listservs and so on. And I think that's all helpful, and word of mouth is the other. In fact, what I can tell you is this. We had our most recent workshop was very well received, and there were some participants who were working at Kaiser Hospital in medical department, and were so taken with the workshop, they collaborated with Kaiser personnel in the medical department to sponsor their own workshop with us.
Oh, excellent.
So even independently, they actually put it all together. And so that sometimes happens. And that's actually the model I'm working with addiction recovery, as a matter of fact, because that's been a very interesting transition from how do I get the word out to therapists about this workshop and training for therapists, and how do we get this outreach to couples? Because it's a challenge when you're starting something new, which is what you're asking about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that very first workshop I created was Roadmap for the Journey, and that was sort of field tested in 4 different treatment programs with good results. And it was hard to jumpstart it.
So you found these treatment centers that wanted to partner with you in the beginning.
Yeah. So that would be kind of a combination of sort of my outreach and and the Gottman Institute.
Mm-hmm.
So there was, for instance, another certified Gottman therapist, Michael Brown, who at the time was a family, I forget his exact title, but like head of family therapy for a treatment program in eastern Arizona for the White Mountain Apache tribe. So the treatment program is treating individuals and couples with substance issues. And this treatment program on the reservation was hosting a 3-day retreat for couples. He invited me to present to the couples. And we had this 3-day workshop that was a sort of a celebration of recovery. And there was banquets and there was horseback riding. And then I was the conference. Now, what was interesting is that the way it was structured is to invite a lot of conversation with the staff there ahead of time, who were elders in the tribe, and to understand sort of the cultural component that I needed to be aware of, and then involve them in the actual presentation of the workshop. So we did role playing, then the couples would break out and then practice the exercise, and then the staff would rove and help assist. And then they would meet with these 3 or 4 couples, each staff person facilitate, how was that for you? How did that exercise go? What were the difficulties and so on? So it gained a lot of momentum in terms of enthusiasm to give couples tools and strategies. And then my goal was to leave the strategies with the therapists who were going to continue to work with the couples. So then I would move on to other treatment programs. And that's sort of the model at this point.
Beautiful. And so this is a huge passion for you. Like even the way that you're talking about it, it's like, how can I reach the most couples, have the biggest impact, have a lasting impact?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, how did I get here? Because right now I've had national and international reach in terms of teaching and training. It's like, this podcast has made me think this through. And here was my master plan, Annie.
Yeah.
And I hope your listeners write this down. I had no master plan. And I started thinking about that. It's what I think drove me to what I feel is right now is good outcomes, really successful outcomes in terms of writing and research and being able to monetize that has been this idea of a passion that I have held for a while. So I did not have an overall structure or plan. It was just doing the very next thing. And I remember a book called The Dragonfly Effect. Is that a book you've heard of?
I mean, I've heard of The Dragonfly Effect. I don't think I've heard of the book.
Okay. So it was actually put together by Aker and Smith, and it was based on Stanford Business grad school class on how to use social media to affect change. And one of the first points they make is to sort of let go of an overall action plan that has more than one step because you cannot predict outcomes. And so what happens is that you say, well, I'm going to do the very next thing that I think will be successful. And then your decision is based on the outcome for that particular decision. It made so much sense to me. I mean, if I were to sort of look backwards and say, how did I end up in this position? What strategies did I do? I cannot really identify anything other than one thing. There's the passion, and I'm going to keep presenting it until it hits where it needs to go, period.
Yeah. And so you're constantly, I mean, it makes me think of like human-centered design, like you're constantly kind of testing what's working. Like you're trying something, you're noticing what worked, and then you're pivoting from there, even though you weren't necessarily thinking like, I'm designing this, I'm pivoting, you were just moving forward.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. But you had this bigger goal in mind that sounds so clear that it probably helped you drive in the right direction.
I believe so. You know, my definition of success has saved me many times, and I define it as the willingness to try the next thing. Not the outcome, the willingness. So if you define the outcome as successful or not because you got what you wanted or didn't, then I think that's problematic. I think it's much more helpful to say that's information. Now I learn from that. That takes me to the next step or changes my direction. And you have to live with, I have to live And in this model, you have to live with the uncertainty of the outcome and be okay with that and say it's all part of the process and part of the journey that I cannot anticipate.
Yeah, I love that. And as soon as we tie our worth or even our success to a particular outcome, a particular number, a particular, let's say, even number of participants, if someone's starting a new workshop, then we're kind of doomed either way, because if we get what we want, now our ego is tied and our success is tied to this thing, which is inevitably going to be in motion. And if we don't get what we want, we feel lousy. So I love this idea of success is staying willing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I kind of researched this a little bit, like, well, who else is saying this? And I don't know if you've heard of a researcher. Her name is Carol Dweck. No. She happens to be out of Stanford as well. It's Dweck. And she teaches, I believe she still teaches at Stanford. And she talks about what this mindset of psychological traits. And so what does that mean? What that means is that the people who are successful in learning new things, or the people who are successful, period, have a belief system that I achieved this through hard work. And I learned from what works, what doesn't work. It's sort of it's a growth, what she calls a growth mindset. Mm-hmm. Versus a fixed mindset where I believe there's an innate ability to do this. So when I don't feel I've achieved my success and I haven't achieved success in the way that I was hoping, I failed. And so it's a very different trajectory. So you can't really fail if you keep trying and say, I'm learning from this experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think that's really true. I work on that in my coaching with therapists. And I also work on that with my parenting, this idea of, instead of falling into like, oh, you're so talented, or you're so good at that, to really look at, like, what did you do to get there? You worked so hard on that. I saw you doing this and this to get there. Yeah.
Exactly. My very first Art and Science of Love workshop, we had 6 couples. Mm-hmm. That, to my mind, was a huge success. We did it. We got through it. From there, it grows.
Yeah. Oh, that's so helpful that you're sharing that. How many people tend to come now?
Now we typically have between 30 and 40. Mm-hmm. More closely 40 couples, which about fills the venue that we're at.
Yeah.
It's just about right.
Yeah. In some ways, I wonder if starting with 6 is even the best, because then you get so much information from those 6 couples.
Exactly. I just did a consultation today with Gottman therapists who had started a new workshop for the first time. And they had less than 10, let's put it that way, participants. And in my mind, it was a rousing success. They got their feet wet, and they did learned a lot in the process. And that's, I think, kind of the nature of these things. You just start with where it's at and move forward. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And if you put all this energy into, building and building and building an idea before executing, some of it can be wasted time, rather than jumping in with something is valuable, but without all of the plans worked out, so that you can, I think I froze.
You're back. You did.
Yeah. So now I have to decide whether what I was saying is important enough to put back in, because it's kind of me thinking out loud about what you were saying.
Okay.
But yeah, I would so much rather see people working this way, where they're starting small, but starting. Can spend so much time planning.
That's exactly right. Mm-hmm. And recognizing that skill sets are based on the ability to learn from what doesn't work just as much as what does work. That is no less valuable. And I think there's so keys to success in my mind really is about mindset and a willingness to sort of stretch yourself and put yourself in situations that are probably uncomfortable if you think about it at first. And the leaps that have happened in my career, and from an entrepreneurial perspective, I would say even, is the willingness to risk. So when I started being trained in the Gottman stuff, and I read their level 2 manual on comorbidities, I thought, I could probably add to this chapter on substance use. So I made the offer. I would like to write a chapter on this, a section on this. Would you be interested? If you want, you can include it. And that kind of opened the door. It got John Gottman's eye. And we started collaborating. And from there, he invited me to co-author a chapter with him on a book. From there, I got an invitation from publishers to write for the Encyclopedia of Couple and Family Therapy on Gottman therapy, which I invited John to co-author with me, which is kind of ironic.
Yeah.
From there, I read the chapter they had on substance use, the encyclopedia. It wasn't published yet, but I asked about it, and I said, well, I don't really see a relational component in this, and this is couple and family therapy. I could offer that chapter. Would you be willing to give it a read? They did, and they've accepted it. So that's going to now be part of the canon on couple and so you have to be kind of willing to just put yourself out there. And if any one of those would have been, no, we're not interested, which I could give you more stories of those, that's okay. That's my position. It's okay.
Maybe it's even good. Like if we ask for enough things, like if we offer, I should say, enough things, then we should be turned down sometimes.
Oh, absolutely.
You know? 'Cause that means we're really risking. Yeah.
That's exactly right. You know, the with this training therapist on this couple and addiction recovery stuff, one of the most prolific writers and researchers and sort of my hero in this whole field is William White. He's written a lot, and he's done a lot of recovery advocacy. He's really well known. I teach addictions at Santa Clara University. He's in all these videos, it turns out, because this is sort of he's just in the middle of so much. So I thought, well, I think I'll show him my stuff on couple recovery. So I sent him an email, and I sent him an invitation. Would it be okay if I sent you my material that I do with these workshops and see what you think? And Bill graciously accepted that invitation and read it and was willing to sort of invite me to co-author an article with him on a blog that will actually promote couple recovery. And so so we've got people that can make a difference. You have to reach out to them and say, here's what I'm doing. Are you interested in learning more or possibly supporting this effort? A willingness to do that will take you to the next level and not to live in fear.
Not to live in fear of rejection or the inevitable feelings that come up for folks around imposter syndrome of, who am I to do this? It seems like if you let the drive of really wanting to help people in the way that you've been driven, then it kind of keeps you moving through that.
Exactly. You have to really believe in what you have to offer. So it's finding not something to, as I said earlier, not something to sell, but something to offer. And to keep finding, what that is. So this to me is really an internal thing. And some of your listeners may have sort of, list follow your heart. Some might have more of a spiritual take or a spiritual direction or a call. Might be a paradigm in many spiritual traditions. And that's what it's been for me, is feeling really driven internally with kind of, I don't know how this is going to turn out exactly, but it's okay. I'm just going to do the very next thing. In 12-step programs, they talk about that. When you're confronted with a lot of things and you get overwhelmed, the motto basically is, what's the next right thing?
Yeah.
So you can kind of tweak that statement a little bit, say, what's the right thing for me to do next? And then we'll see what happens.
And would you say that has been kind of your way through both as a clinician and as a business owner?
It took me a while to learn that. So initially I tried to be more structured and organized. Well, it's not that I'm disorganized. I mean, I put a lot of work into what I do. So it isn't coincidental these outcomes happen. There's just no guarantee that these outcomes are going to happen as a result of the work. Yeah. So at one point, I felt like no matter what I was doing, it wasn't working. And I hit kind of this crisis point, and this was fairly early in my career. And I didn't know what to do. And I had this transition. It took me probably 9-10 months to kind of work through this kind of dark, what am I doing? Is this going to work? It took me a while to kind of sit with this awareness of, I'm going to just do the next thing. And again, there are spiritual traditions that sort of support that notion.
And was that when you were starting a private practice, or what was going on at that point?
It was really starting the private practice and also trying to break into teaching. That was my other dream. And that's why I actually went back to get my doctorate to teach. And it was hard to get that job. So I had many, many rejections. And then the doors opened up because I kept knocking eventually. And then I even got an invitation without knocking. And that's what's happening now.
That's so great for people to get to hear this because they could look at you and what you're doing and how you're impacting people everywhere and think like, yeah, well, he's just that guy. Like that's just who he was meant to be. But you're saying, no, like this, there have been times when it didn't work out. Like there have been times where I had to keep knocking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We would have to have about 10 more podcasts to cover those. It would be a lot more words to say. But this is kind of the summary of what I really believe in my heart. I hope therapists can hear this. And from the entrepreneurial place is to find that thing that's inside, that passion, and just take the next step. Not to be fearful. And not to be fearful that call people and say, hey, you're doing what I'm interested in doing. And what can I learn from you and how can you support me if you're willing to do that?
Yeah. And so when someone is thinking of reaching out to the people who have been their heroes, people they look up to, what's something to keep in mind as they're stepping into those conversations?
For me, it's been, this is going to probably sound silly, they're just people. We have people like John and Julie Gottman who are legends, but they're people. I'm a person, and I have something that you might be interested in. So I think just kind of keeping that perspective and not getting too hung up on their status or their celebrity takes a little bit of work. Having had the opportunity to do that now for a while, it works very well to keep that perspective.
That makes sense. And now that you're in that position, where, there are people who are, I'm sure, intimidated to reach out to you, that firsthand, like, okay, I'm a person. This is how this works.
Yeah, this is how it works. And we're a community and the services that you provide are incredibly valuable to let people know how to take the next step. And I'm imagining that what you're needing to do with people is have them shift their mindset as well. Right. So what are the things that we think and hold on to that hold us back from even trying or see us in a certain light that's not particularly helpful? What do we need to change in that?
Yeah. And then another thing I notice is that, I don't know if you have this, if you've noticed this in your life, but that having people around you who can see something bigger for you than you can see for yourself can help so much.
Yes.
And if we're surrounding ourselves with people who are scared themselves and are maybe going to tell us like, well, maybe just keep doing what you're doing now, that can hold us back or can let us stay safe.
It's incredibly helpful to have your support people, your cheerleaders. And it's easy to go into negative self-talk or minimization of the accomplishments or even just the efforts put into trying something. So it's very helpful, just like you're saying, I think, to find people that can support you and rally you and remind you of what you've done and the effort you put in, regardless of the outcome.
Yes.
It's a great idea, Annie.
That's so true.
My wife is stellar in that area. She's just wonderful. She's my hero.
That's amazing. Yeah. So she'll notice the work that you've been putting in. She'll notice the things that you're accomplishing maybe when you wouldn't stop to do it.
That's exactly right. I can get a little caught up in the to-do and she'll remind me of things that have happened. So it's not like the things I'm sharing with you I've necessarily mastered, but it's this idea of striving for just doing the next thing and then reflecting and celebrating the success and just trying, I think is really helpful.
Have you figured out anything about balancing being the CEO and the clinician with also having a life?
That's been a struggle for 35 years, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, when you're self-employed, as you know, when do you punch in and when do you punch out? And right. I think people have different strategies for that. Mine's kind of fluid. I am able to take breaks. I'm able to switch things off as much as I like on and off switches and shiny things that light up and are powered, computers and all that stuff. It's very helpful and healthy to build into the schedule downtime and non-thinking and non-productive time in terms of the entrepreneurial piece or the workshop piece. But it is a struggle. And I think for me, it's a series of self-corrections when it starts to feel a little out of balance. I have what I call situational ADD. I just made that up.
Oh, but yeah, that makes sense.
And when I start looking and I'm not typical, I have maybe a little bit of that, but really not much, right? Not diagnosable, I don't think. But when I get into that overwhelmed stress category, I look very ADD-ish, and I know I'm out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
And Cindy's also good at noticing and reminding me. That helps too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's time to pull back.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is something I ask everybody. What do you charge for the workshop, and what do you charge for work with you, just with couples?
Well, the workshops, depends which workshops we're talking about.
Oh, right. I'm thinking specifically the art and science of love.
I don't actually know what we charge.
Because that's okay. You were just saying that
Yeah.
that your co-presenter is the one who kind of is handling the logistical side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really funny. I think this probably shouldn't be on the recording. I think it's $7.95. I don't remember. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah. No, I love that answer. That's great. That's really great, because it's kind of telling of like what your mindset is and stepping into it. You're not like counting the dollars. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
What I can say with couples in addiction recovery,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of varied.
Mm-hmm.
You see, it depends kind of, there's some flexibility, I suppose,
Mm-hmm.
with who's offering it and who's hosting it, that kind of stuff. But I don't know.
That's okay. I love that, Bob. And then what about with couples? I imagine you're not really accepting new folks.
I'm actually not.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
I've kind of closed my practice to new clients for a while now.
Yeah.
And I'm also limiting, I've kind of been whittling down to very few sessions.
Nice.
At this point.
Yeah. And so that just feels right with the rhythm of your work life right now with all the other stuff you're doing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the part when I recognized I can't really maintain the practice and the things that are opening up in this other area.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to change that balance. So I do less of the clinical and more of the teaching and the workshops and the other stuff. And so it's been a learning process, and a process of going from 5 days a week to 3 days a week to now I'm probably going to be going to 1 or 2 days a week with the practice for a while.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you were going to time travel back to when you very first started your private practice, what would you tell the Bob of that time?
I probably would say, I probably want to give myself the advice I'm giving right now and that I've learned that's taken me all of these years. I learned from my father, who at age 61 decided to start a gardening business.
Oh, how cool.
And so he would go from door to door, knocking on and saying, your yard looks like it needs work. And they'd give him a card. I mean, talk about a cold call.
Yeah.
The man was fearless, right? He would just do this. And I think that strategy somehow got embedded in my consciousness to say, just do it. Just go to the next level, whatever that is for you. Don't give up. And you're going to have moments of discouragement. That's all part of the process. Don't expect not to happen. When it does, learn from it and go to the next step. So that's probably what I would want to tell myself.
Excellent. And what's the best place for therapists to get in touch with you, throw compliments at you, and learn more about your work?
Sure. Thank you. Well, my website is drrobertnavarra.com. And then I have a professional Facebook page that I finally am paying attention to again after months of neglect. And that's couplesrecovery.com.
Oh, no, that's on Facebook. Couples
on Facebook, yeah. So I think my name's in there somewhere if I'm giving the right address, but it's Couples Recovery.
Okay.
If you do that, you'll find me or type in my name. And that's where I'm finally updating people and letting them know what's going on workshop-wise.
Okay. Very good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bob. This has been such a pleasure.
Well, thank you, Annie. It's been really fun and kind of a time to reflect for me as well on a lot of the questions. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Therapist Clubhouse. If you're finding this podcast supportive, please tell a therapist friend about it. That's how we can help more people. I'll see you next week. That was fun. Thank you.